delighted to introduce Rachel Graham, a marine expert, shark conservationist, and founder of Mar Alliance, working across Central America and the Caribbean. Welcome, Rachel.
Well, hello. This evening I want to talk to you about a transformational emotion, which I think can do wonders for catalyzing shark conservation. And I think probably one of the best ways of illustrating it is telling you a little bit about my story and this emotion. 25 years ago, I had just quit working with the United Nations. I'd skipped over the border from Guatemala to Belize because they needed a zoologist who was a dive master, and I thought, what the heck, I can give you a hand. And there I met several traditional fishers, Halford Williams, Eloy Cuevas, Sonny Garbutt, several colleagues working on research from the University of South Carolina, who wanted to find out more about spawning fish. Fish reproduce in large quantities, we find out, and at a certain time of the year. So not really knowing what to expect, except for they needed a scientist, I thought I'd give it a go. I went out on a 7-meter panga, outboard engine, into 4 6-foot waves outside of the second longest barrier reef in the world, along the coasts of Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras. And there I was offshore from Belize. And at a certain moment, Eloy, traditional fisher of many years, says, "We're here." I said, "What do you mean we're here?" "We're in the middle of the sea." "We're here." His traditional knowledge of the sea and of the locations was vast. I said, "Okay." Hand on the face, into the regulator, rolled backwards into the sea, figured out where am I, and started looking for fish everywhere. And I'm looking, and I'm looking, and I'm not finding. And I turn around. I'm going to use Deb.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. And there in front of me, literally feet away, was a 4.5-foot mouth. And I'm bricking it. I don't know how else to say it, but anyway, I'm sitting there not realizing that I would have this kind of experience, because of course I was looking for fish. This animal just came right up to me, body full of spots, and it glided over the top of me like a jumbo 747. And it was so elegant and graceful that as I tried to move out of the way, it just avoided me with its tail, a gentle sweep that kind of sent me, I guess, a little bit of turbulence sent me swimming away. And I just sat there and I thought, what just happened? I was absolutely overwhelmed. And this is basically what happened to me. This was Mr Facey, the whale shark. And in Belizean Creole, Mr Facey, or Facey, somebody with Facey, is somebody with attitude. And this animal had so much attitude. And he came around again, and he would park his snout in our bellies. And every time we would do that, I was just blown away. And what was that emotion that I sensed at that time? It was awe. It was unadulterated awe. And people say that awe is an emotion that you feel when you're completely overwhelmed by the senses. It's an emotion that can help you transform your perceptions, your knowledge of the natural world, and it can catalyze action and conservation and a sense of connectedness with nature. And what did I do after this? I quit all plans of going to Africa. I completely diverted my life. I did not go back to the UN. I dedicated my life to sharks and to Belize. And I realized that after the whale shark encounter, in talking to all the traditional fishers I had started to work with, they had vast treasure troves of knowledge. And they were also extremely concerned with the state of the sea, and especially concerned about the state of sharks. And sure enough, sharks are in huge trouble. We've seen a decline of over 70% in large vertebrates in the last 50 years. And now, of the shark and ray species that have been assessed by the IUCN, International Union for the Conservation of Nature, over 1,100 species, 37% are threatened with extinction. So sharks are definitely in trouble. And what are they in trouble for? Fisheries. It's really fishing. A lot of people say, is it fin soup? It's just fishing and overfishing across the board. And a lot of people see large international vessels fishing, but really what we tend to work with are the nearshore, small-scale fisheries and fishers, because that's where the greatest diversity of sharks and rays exists. It's in those coastal areas where you have huge overlap with human populations. And so I then, with the help of my now much larger cohort of traditional fishers, started asking the questions of how do we assess what our sharks are doing in many of these tropical countries, and especially in Belize, because nobody knew. There were no numbers. And they said, let's find out. And so just like the whale shark work, which I might say turned into a PhD that was driven by the questions from the community and the fishers, we then replicated that approach to the rest of the sharks. And it was really important to not only determine how strong the fishery was, but also what's happening with sharks when they're not being fished. And in 2006, I started this project, and it's going on to this day. And the reason why we need to work with sharks is not just because they're being fished, but because they have a horrible reputation in many countries. And a lot of people are terribly afraid of them, or they see them as trophy animals, like you see here. And so we need to change this perception. We need to change how people feel about them, how people treat them, and we need to curry stewardship. We need to go from that to this. This is an incredible traditional fisher named Ivan Torres, who used to fish everything and now is a steward of some of the most iconic species, not just sharks, but also turtles and even some of the larger fin fish like Goliath grouper. So how do you get from that experience with a whale shark, with working with a handful of people, to a much broader public in many countries where you need to have this happen? You need to scale up. And I hear this from funders all the time. What's your plan for scaling? How are you going to replicate this? Well, the way you do it is by ensuring that from the start of your work, you include communities, and you have music. Music is good. That's part of art. That also brings on awe. You include communities, but you also use the facts and the science that you generate, and you bring it to the heart. And this is really important. And that's why I'm saying that awe is so incredibly important as an emotion to help catalyze conservation in sharks. And one of the first ways that I started doing this is we had questions to answer. How many sharks do we have? How are they distributed? What's happening with them? And so I got many of the shark fishers and fishers who fish other species, and we went out in small pangas, and we spent years creating baselines, developing new skills. And as a result of this democratization of science, you now have all of these fishers training other fishers, and now we have hundreds of fishers trained in monitoring techniques, not just for sharks, but for a whole host of other species. And why is this important? Not just because they're generating the science. They then understand the data. And when they're called to the table by decision makers, they can stand up for these species and the science. But it also generates income. And this is an incredibly important alternative or supplement in income that often replaces up to 25% of their fishing revenue. And many of them say, I don't want to stop fishing. I want to continue fishing, but I want to do this as well if possible. And what we've seen is shifts in behavior as a result of working with sharks, and their mandate is to keep the shark alive. We've seen massive shifts in behavior as a result. And because they're part of the science, they themselves are seeing firsthand when conservation goes right. And they take that story back to the communities and to the decision makers. And I'm showing you this screenshot because this was a year and a half ago in a site where we never got sharks, and now on one camera trap underwater, we were getting 7, 8 sharks at a time. And to show you how, and to tell you how incredibly invested the fishers are as stewards, I was getting WhatsApps from them going, guess how many sharks we saw on the cameras? Oh my God, and sending me screenshots and everything, because they're even processing the data and learning to use computers and passing this knowledge on to not only fishers, but their children and their wives, which came in really handy during the pandemic when they had to diversify their income streams with their wives. And it's such an incredible story of hope when you then replicate this approach out to other countries. So I started in Belize, but I replicated the approach to 13 other sites in 6 other countries. And this is in Panama, with one of the most critically endangered vertebrates in the world, the large-toothed sawfish. I've been hunting for sawfish for 25 years, and I get a WhatsApp from Jairo Cunampio, who is Imbira indigenous from the Darien region in Panama, where most people know of the migration, the human migration going through the Darien Gap. It's also one of the last stronghold areas for the large-toothed sawfish. He caught the first sawfish in our joint Fisher Marlines team. I was elated. Of course, I was a little jealous, just a little bit. But I was elated because all of a sudden, the fishers you see there and Jairo, that was it. We didn't have to say anything more. They're now on board, and they have moved from fishers who used to remove the rostra and sell them. They can sell for $1,000, $5,000 for a rostra. The rostral teeth are used for cockfighting, to community science investigators measuring where and as they can. We have to replace that measuring tape. It's looking a little oxidized. And then releasing the sawfish, these juvenile sawfish. And because of this expanding network of fishers, with Jairo's help, we are now able to say we have caught and released 8 large-toothed sawfish. There is no other country outside of Australia that has had that success. And we scale up the sense of awe, we scale up the work by involving children. Everybody's been talking about this. We're a huge, firm believer in getting children involved in nature. And so I'm a huge believer in putting children in the water with sharks. Parents might not agree with me. I did have to sign a lot of release forms with the parents for this. But this is where I'm hugely grateful to the Whitley Fund for Nature because, yes, you probably didn't know I was going to be putting kids in the water with sharks, but the program was called Kids Meet Sharks. And there you see 40 nurse sharks. We have now reached over 8,000 students with our educational program and over 1,200 in immersive work. And where you can't meet all of them, you get the VR headsets out and you create VR and you reach other fishers, other classrooms, people you normally wouldn't be able to meet, so that you can transfer that sense of awe as well. And you go to where they are if you don't have electricity, etc. And this is in the Gunayala Comarca and Panama. And another way of currying awe is through art and music, but art. And I just want to pause very briefly on this. And this is to just talk about how long conservation takes. This is a lovely gratuitous shot of my two children on the left-hand side, Gabe and Zavi. And they didn't have a choice in life. Sons of a traditional fisher and a marine biologist. And they have become the next stewards of the marine world. And the children on the right, if you see the man in the cap in the back, that was the original traditional fisher I worked with, Eloy Cuevas. I asked him to bring his children to the island to work with us. And two of the children in the back with the red arrows now work with us regularly. And they're not the only children of fishers. And I thought I was 29, but never mind. Yes, I'm older than I seem. And all of this collective work leads to incredible policy wins. It took 20 years to ban nets from Belize. 20 years. But now that we've shown that one nation can ban fishing nets, it's going to be easier for the next nation to do it. And we are seeing hammerheads starting to come back. And so we and I believe that we can really foster cooperation between sharks and people, especially in the hunting of lionfish, like you see here, cooperative hunting between nurse shark and scuba diver. And ultimately, foster a huge sense of awe, if not directly, then through all the means that I had just mentioned previously. So I would urge you all, I would ask you all to go and find your joy. I would ask you, of course, to find your joy with sharks, but if you're a little skittish there, then go find what brings you joy and what brings you huge awe, because that is what is going to help further catalyze conservation and especially shark stewardship. Thanks.